Dr. Paulos Mar Gregorios, he says Sri Aurobindo was a solitary sage who sought to build some systematic philosophy while pursuing sadhana with undivided attention. Kindly help us to understand this statement.
Sri Aurobindo did not in fact like being called a philosopher, although he has given us a philosophy like many of the ancient Indian mystics whom we call rishis. That's because in the Indian tradition, philosophy is the outcome of experience. Experience is primary. And the experience that the rishis and the mystics have is suprasensory. So in that sense, they have, within quotes, seen something and in some cases given it an expression in words, and in some cases also woven a philosophy out of it. And since experience is primary, he used to say that I have seen, I am not a thinker. Although he was a great thinker, and in fact it's only great thinkers who can then weave a philosophy out of their experience. So he did give us a philosophy, but it was secondary to the experiences that he had, and his philosophy is systematic, highly rational, and at the same time it encompasses the truth in such a global manner that he has not really given any rigid guidelines about how his philosophy can be put into practice. It's not sort of the type of approach in which, step-by-step approach or do it yourself sort of a guidelines in which you are told exactly how to do the cookbook approach. That is not there. So there's plenty of freedom to carve out your own path within the framework of a few broad guidelines, and the philosophy is meant more to actually convince many people in the present age who tend to approach everything through the intellect and want everything to be rationalized. So the experience has been rationalized, but the starting point was not rational analysis.
While understanding about the personality of Sri Aurobindo, His Grace Dr. Paulos Mar Gregorios, he says Sri Aurobindo was a notable exception. He was a professor of English, freedom fighter, assertive nationalist, a poet, literary critic, sage, mystic, and finally Maharshi. He continues to say that no single Indian has comprehended such a widely and deep Catholic scope of knowledge, experience and interest. Please explain the significance of this statement.
It's very true that all the facets of Sri Aurobindo which we can see are so diverse, and any area that he entered, he has done with such perfection that he truly sort of is a phenomenon which was unprecedented and unlikely to be repeated in the near future. But at the same time, all these can be looked at in a holistic manner, because these different aspects of his life came to the fore at different stages of his life. That is because of the role that he was expected to play during that phase of life. But there was a seamless extension, and if one has to look at one characteristic of his into which everything fits in, it is that he was a highly spiritually evolved person, a deeply spiritual person. And that is something that emerged as early as at the age of 11, when he wrote a poem taking apparently a cue from the Genesis. From the quickened womb of the primal gloom, the sun rolled black and bare, till I wove him a vest for his Ethiop breast of the threads of my golden hair. And when the broad tent of the firmament arose on its airy spars, I penciled the hue of its matchless blue and spangled it around with stars. So, a poetic sort of description of the creation, and at the age of 11. So he was a deeply spiritual person, highly spiritually evolved right since childhood, and a poet by temperament. So these are the things which sum it up. But then when it comes to the type of roles that he played, one can look at it in different stages. In India, to start with, he lived for just 7 years and went through a westernized upbringing. because his father was an Anglophile, and he thought that if India has to progress, we have to copy the ways of the Western world, and therefore he tried to shield his children from all influences Indian. And to further make that sure, he was taken to England at the age of 7, where he continued to be for 14 years. And that you can say is a sort of a preparation for what was to come. Being extremely intelligent, he returned as a great scholar, not only well versed in the English language, having mastered it better than the British themselves, but also having learnt many European languages, understood, assimilated, and then having had a critical look at the Western civilization. And then came the next phase in India, in Baroda, as it was then called, as a professor of English. Now during this phase, he was a much admired teacher, no doubt, but at the same time he spent about 14 years, around the same time as he did in England, going through, first time in teaching himself Sanskrit and going through the ancient Indian scriptures in their original. This he tried to do because he realized that while he knew so much about the West, he knew very little about India, and he tried to make this deficiency up in a very serious, concerted manner. And the result was that he became a unique synthesis of the East and the West. Now this again was a sort of a preparation for what was yet to come. But then right from his stay in England, we find that he had got involved in the freedom movement, and this he continued while in Baroda by writing a few articles in Hindu Prakash and so on to galvanize the youth of the country. But then he entered the freedom struggle in a big way in 1905 or so, and stayed with it for just 5 years. That seems was a necessary phase in his life and was divinely ordained. It was a divine intervention that he must spend that much time for the freedom of the country and no more. Both the things were important. And during those 5 years, he shook the British Empire through all that he wrote. It was his power was primarily in his pen. So what he wrote galvanized the youth of the country. The British Empire was shaken up, and he gave a blueprint for the course of action that we should follow, which was essentially boycott. That is, make it difficult for the British government and unprofitable for the British government to rule us. And the 5 types of boycotts that he talked about were economic boycott, buy only things which are made in India, educational boycott, go to educational institutions which we create, not those which the British have created for us, executive boycott, don't pay unfair taxes, no matter what the punishment, and judicial boycott, don't go for justice to British courts, and finally social boycott those Indians who do not participate in the other 4 types of boycott. For example, if an Indian insists on buying things made in England or outside India, and then particularly in England, and then stop interacting with them socially, don't invite them home, don't go to their parties, don't get your children married to their families, so social boycott. So these were the 5 types of boycott which would make it difficult and unprofitable for the British to rule us and motivate the Indians to participate at least in some way in the freedom struggle. He wanted it to be a mass movement, because he said that till 1905, till he entered, the freedom movement was confined to a few westernized, educated Indian elite, and they wanted the freedom of the country, but at the same time they felt that it was very impractical to drive the British out, so they confined themselves to asking for small concessions. It was Sri Aurobindo who said that no, our goal should be total freedom, not only because India should be free, but also India should be free for the sake of the rest of the world. Because what India could go to the rest of the world in terms of spiritual wisdom, which the West was going to need very soon, only India could do. So India had to be free not only for its own sake, but also for the rest of the world. That is a vision that he had right from the beginning. So he set the goal of total freedom. But at the same time, within 5 years, he realized, these 5 years after giving the blueprint, he realized that, and that was again through a divine intervention in prison, that he did not have to continue with the freedom struggle anymore, because his inner calling as well as his true mission in life was something different. And therefore after he was acquitted after a 1-year trial in 1909, he soon declared, I think in 1910 he said, that for every major movement there is a leader sent by the divine. And for the freedom movement, which should be a mass movement, I am not one. I am not that leader. That leader will come. And as if it was a prophetic statement, Mahatma Gandhi did come about 10 years later and used the blueprint which Sri Aurobindo had created in terms of boycott, with some modifications, of course, as anybody would. But he used that blueprint, used the same principles, and made it a mass movement which had been initiated by Sri Aurobindo, but he had not taken it to that point where it could become a force to drive the British out. That Mahatma Gandhi continued. So these two basic principles, non-cooperation and making it a mass movement rather than it's remaining confined to a select few, the educated elite. These two things Sri Aurobindo had already emphasized, and that is what Gandhiji continued. So his role was very brief, but it was very important and pivotal in the freedom movement, because it is he who shook the British Empire and made them realize that they may not be here forever, and he prepared sort of also the blueprint for how anyone else who is the leader sent by the divine, who is going to be the major instrument of the divine for taking India to freedom, when he comes, he already has some guidelines available. So that his role was important. So, but then if you see, even during that time, he was not essentially a politician. If you see his writings, which were before he went to prison in Bande Mataram, they are political in nature, but they have a spiritual undercurrent. And after his release, he started another magazine, Karma Yogin, in which the balance was the other way around. They were more spiritual with a political undercurrent. And then in 1910, finally came the time when he got this inner command that he should completely get out of the freedom struggle and go to Pondicherry. And that's what he did in 1910. So, if you see right from his childhood, when he wrote that poem at the age of 11, his involvement in the freedom struggle, and everything else that he did in between. In Baroda, going into the ancient Indian scriptures, having a few major spiritual experiences on his arrival in India in 1893, in Baroda around 1907, then in prison during the year 1908 to 1909. So all these things show that basically he was a spiritual person. It's just that he was destined to play these different roles in life, and that is why all these phases on the surface appear different. But basically he was here as a spiritual master. With that, that was his ultimate destiny. So that runs all through from his childhood onwards up to at every stage, in every phase of his life. And after, of course, after 1910, after he went to Pondicherry, he was in solitude for about 4 years, more or less essentially in solitude. And then came the trigger in the form of the mother and her husband. They together started a journal, the Arya. And in 6.5 years, he wrote what an average person can't read in a lifetime. So many of his major works actually emerged from that monthly journal Arya, which was started in 1914. And the way it happened was that in each of those issues he had a major theme, like say the Veda or the Gita or the Upanishads, in the Indian culture, spiritual philosophy, yoga, and so on. So on each of these themes there was generally one article in each issue. Later on what was done was that these issues were dismantled and the articles on the same theme put together in the same sequence as in the Arya. And that gave us a book. And it's a remarkable continuity. Although they were written a month apart, there's a remarkable continuity from one article to the next, so that they read like chapters of a book. And although he didn't spend too much time on writing them, it was sort of very high-level product, sort of 64 pages ready within a week. He used to spend just about 1 week every month on this journal, Arya. So 64 pages created within 1 week, but still you find that the English language is not only flawless, it is also very elegant. Even prose reads like poetry. And when all the articles, say for example on yoga, were put together, we got the work, the book, The Synthesis of Yoga. When the articles relate to spiritual philosophy were put together, we got the book, The Life Divine. So that is how some of his major works were created. And even if we take away everything else that he did, what he wrote in 6.5 years will give him a very important place in the spiritual history of the world. Because in the category of spiritual literature, which is rooted primarily in the Indian tradition, the original of which was written in the English language, his works remains unsurpassed to this day in both quantity and quality. But then he did a lot more for the freedom struggle and also as a spiritual master to pave the way for the next leap in evolution, which is something which appeared a little utopian at that time 100 years ago. But now more and more people are talking about it. More and more people are talking about moving away from religions towards spirituality. More and more people are talking about a new stage in evolution where spirituality is becoming more and more of a mass phenomenon rather than being confined to a select few, and that the human being of the future is likely to be much better in spite of whatever appears on the surface may be contrary, but on the whole we are progressing towards a better world. I mean, this is a vision that probably not only a vision but also as a goal. He was the first spiritual master to set as a goal that the world is not destined to be a place of sorrow and suffering as it has so far been. Just because it has been so far doesn't mean that it will always be so. We are nearing that point where the world will be a much better place to live in. And how that will happen, that also, for that also he gave a formula, which was essentially a formula for redesigning man, a different type of man, and that will be essentially the result of a rise in consciousness. So that's how, you can see that in spite of all these different aspects of his life which appear different, there's an undercurrent of spirituality throughout, from childhood onwards, and these different phases were like playing a different role at different stages of life. For example, if you see, in the Indian Hindu tradition, we have incarnations of God like say Rama and Krishna. Now, they played a role in eliminating some symbols of evil, like say Rama killed Ravan. But at the same time, he also played the role of a good student, a good son, and a good king. Now, all these different stages were sort of gave an example of how you can have all these, how you can play all these roles in the world. So he had different phases in his life. In the same way, Sri Aurobindo also had different phases in his life. But the spiritual undercurrent was there throughout in everything that we did, as a writer, as a poet, as a freedom fighter. In everything you find that spiritual touch was never gone. So, even in his writings, not only spirituality, but there's no subject under the sun which he has not touched. History, sociology, psychology, health sciences, scientific research. It's just about anything you pick up, any subject under the sun, he has touched it, and touched it in a serious scholarly manner, and to everything he has given a unique spiritual orientation, a timeless orientation, which meant sort of a global look at everything, where individual disciplines were not different to him. All these were just parts of a larger truth. That's the way he was, including politics. He has written a lot about politics also, but even that has a very different type of a touch which only he could perhaps give. And that's what the scholars like Reverend Paulos Gregorios, they have also appreciated.
His Grace Dr. Paulus Mar Gregorios, he says, Sri Aurobindo sought to redeem the collective soul of nations and peoples, developing in that process a sociology, politics and economics for a spiritualized society. So please explain what is this spiritualized society?
Yes, and this is one of the unique sort of things in Sri Aurobindo's vision. And to put it briefly, what he said was that if we look at evolution from matter to life, from life to creatures like plants and then animals, and the latest product being the human being, human being is not certainly the final product of evolution, because if we look at this evolution, one way of looking at it is that there has been a progressively greater expression of the divinity hidden in all creation. You know, the spirit of the creator is all pervasive. It pervades also dead matter, but then dead matter expresses very little of it. That's why we feel that it does not feel, it cannot think, it cannot do anything, it doesn't know anything. But then that spirit, that spark is there even in dead matter. So the first step in evolution was the creation of life, in which that consciousness of that hidden consciousness of the Supreme was expressed a little better. Then came creatures with a mind in which was expressed still better. And then human being whose mind is so well developed that he stands clearly apart from the rest of the creation, and not only stands apart in terms of having a remarkable intellect, but also in having the urge, the aspiration to evolve, to leave this world better than we arrive. And the human being not only has this urge, it also has the capacity to do so. And essentially what it would mean is express a little more of the hidden divinity within. Now, which means that the human being has the same type of urge as the evolutionary process has so far been. Which means that if the trend so far is any indication, this process will continue, and even in the natural course, there will come creatures who will express more of this hidden divinity than human being does. But the uniqueness of human being means that the human being can be a collaborator of nature in this process. So this process can be accelerated. And he could see that that will also happen because more and more people will get involved as individuals in working for a higher level of consciousness, in evolving during their lifetime. And what this rise in consciousness as a result of individual evolution means is that the person becomes a better person, in simple language. So, which means that the degree of level of consciousness determines human nature. So when we say that there's a lower human nature and a higher human nature, what it translates into is that the higher the consciousness, more of the higher nature we express. Something like, if we take the two ways, one is the consciousness which makes us feel I am distinct from others, so it separates us. Now that is the consciousness which is rooted primarily in the ego. Ego is a separative force. It was planted in us because it had a purpose, because exclusive attention on oneself is necessary for survival. So it has a value, but only up to a point. But then the human being was, and for that matter it's not only human beings who have that, although they can use it in a different way. The creatures which have a mind also have something other than the ego, which is the opposite of the ego planted in them, and that is love. Now love is a uniting force. So in that sense it is an antidote to ego. So separation and intimacy, they both seem to be sort of the roots of, seeds of both of these have been planted in us. And what a higher level of consciousness or expressing more of the divinity, which can be done by human beings, at least partly through personal effort, what it means is expressing more love and less of the ego. So, how can that happen? One can be that the manifestations of the ego can be suppressed, but that is not Sri Aurobindo's way. His way is increase love, the ego will again automatically start receding in the background. So instead of suppression, like if you have two lines, one shorter than the other, there are two ways of making the shorter line longer. One is to wipe out a part of the longer line, that would be suppression. The other is extend the shorter line so much that it becomes longer than the line which was longer earlier. So now the longer line becomes shorter because the shorter line has been extended. So extend that shorter line, which is love. So do that, and that is how, and that is something which will automatically happen when a person lives a life which is spiritual. Now, what does the spiritualized society mean? What it means essentially is that there will come a point as a result of this process of individuals working for their evolution, individuals arriving in this world at a higher level of consciousness because of the natural process of evolution. There will come a point where there will be a sufficient number of human beings who are at a higher level of consciousness than is the norm today, and the result will be that the average level of human consciousness will go up, because the spectrum will be always there, but it is the numbers which determine what is the average in spite of that wide spectrum. Now currently, so far, for thousands of years, the average has been such that human affairs have been dominated by an ego-driven consciousness. When the number of those who are at a higher level of consciousness and are driven by love, their number goes up, the average will go up, and the result will be that the typical human nature will be love-driven rather than ego-driven, and these love-driven people at a higher level of consciousness will start dominating the affairs of the world. They will determine how the world will be run, and that is what will give us a better world. And that is what will be a spiritualized society. Now within that spiritualized society, naturally politics will be different, economics will be different, the social structure will be different, but then those will be a byproduct or a corollary to the higher level of consciousness. So the root is the level of consciousness. When the average goes up, then all these things will change accordingly. So it's not that he's talking about them separately. He has talked about them separately for convenience, to explain himself. And this he has done to the largest extent in a twin work, the human cycle and the ideal of human unity. These two are considered a twin work which complement each other. And in this he has gone into all these details, and essentially what he has talked about is that the result of this will be that there will be a greater sense of oneness, and this oneness, which will be psychological in nature, will be rooted in that higher level of consciousness. Because at the higher level of consciousness, when you are love driven and when you are rooted in that consciousness of consciousness which has a wider vision, wider, higher and deeper vision, you look at what is common to us rather than what divides us. And then we find from the point of view that higher truth which is visible to that in that deeper vision, that the way we are identical is more fundamental than the way we are different. On the surface we are separate and different. At a deeper level we are not even separate, because our source is the same and our essence is the same and our ultimate destiny is the same. The separation is only a partial reality. So what is the same in each one of us, that is the divine essence, the soul, is more fundamental than what separates us on the surface in terms of in the way we look, the color of our skin, our gender, our nationality, our religion. All these things pale into insignificance as compared to the fundamental oneness that unites us. So when we organize our life around that oneness without being unaware of the differences, without making any attempt to wipe out that diversity, so in spite of that diversity, we will be able to organize our life around the oneness which unites us. And this psychological sense of oneness is what will lead to human unity and pave the way for the type of a large aggregate, finally a world government, which will not try to wipe out this diversity. It will preserve this diversity will continue, it will be preserved, but in spite of that we will be able to have a world government. And he has looked at in these works also at how larger aggregates, larger than even nations, came up in the past, the empires. But these empires were founded primarily on force and conquering the stronger countries, conquering the weaker countries, and then trying to impose some sort of a uniformity, the dominant country trying to spread its culture and impose some sort of a uniformity on the colonies, because to some extent they were sincerely and genuinely convinced that they are better than them, and that's why we have been able to conquer them. So they try to wipe out the diversity and impose some sort of a uniformity. But it is because of the failure to do so, because primarily the whole exercise was rooted at a lower level of consciousness and ego-driven consciousness, that the colonies were also impoverished, exploited, treated cruelly, and so on, and ultimately the empires fell. But the type of world government which he has visualized eventually, for which there could be stepping stones like the United Nations and so on, but the ultimate type of world government that he has visualized is one in which the affairs of the world will be dominated by a sense of psychological oneness, which in turn will lead to human unity, which in turn will lead to a different type of a social structure, a different type of an economic arrangement, a different type of political structure. So it is in that context that he has talked about all these aspects, and that will be the type of spiritualized society which he has talked about. Because basically, if you look at the problems of cruelty and suffering and sorrow which have characterized human societies for thousands of years, what are they really rooted in? No matter what type of a social and political structure one has, there will always be some people, because of the way we are right from the beginning, right from birth onwards, there will be some who will be a little more intelligent, some more hardworking. And also in any political structure, there will be some who will be more powerful, who will be in the seat of power. So there is a certain amount of inequality which is inevitable, which means that, not inequality, I should say dissimilarity, diversity which is inevitable, and unequal sort of attributes which we are considering desirable. So there will be an unequal distribution of those. So coupled with the ego, what would happen is that those who are have political power, those who are more intelligent, more hardworking, they will try to corner more of the resources for themselves, leaving less for others, more than their share. And not only that, with the remarkable intellect that human beings have, they'll also be able to justify it, they'll be able to legalize it, frame the type of rules that will make it appear completely normal. But at the same time, what it would mean is a great deal of inequality and injustice which may be legalized, and which in turn will lead to all the cruelty, misery and suffering. If you look at the three sort of ideals of the French Revolution, that was a remarkable step in that direction, but then it was flawed. I'll explain both, as Sri Aurobindo has explained. Equality, liberty and fraternity. Very noble words. Equality is something which the communists picked up in a big way. Who can have a quarrel with the basic idea from each according to his capacity to each according to his needs? Very noble in intention, very rational also. But at the same time, one cannot have even a semblance of equality without taking away liberties, which was the second thing which French Revolution emphasized. So without taking, and that's what the communist countries did, they took away liberties. But then, because the system, in spite of being well-intentioned and rational, was being implemented by people with an average level of consciousness, even within that government, those who had more power, they cornered more power more resources for themselves, they cornered more of the resources. The result was that at a certain stage, the president of the USSR was living in greater luxury than the president of the United States. So that happened in those countries, and eventually communism fell. So some semblance of equality could be created only by taking away liberties. The opposite happened in democracies. The emphasis was on liberties. But then who can have a quarrel with it? Again, very rational and very well intentioned. Let each individual have a role to play in who will govern the country. So everybody is equal, everybody has one vote, and the majority decides who will rule them. And if the ruler does not come up to the expectations, you can have another government after 5 years. Who can have a quarrel with such a rational and well-intentioned system? But then again the same thing happens. You cannot give all the liberties which democracy to some extent ensures and also have equality. So equality has to be sacrificed for the sake of those liberties. The key to the whole thing is fraternity. Because if we have universal brotherhood and sisterhood, which essentially means a sense of oneness, when that is there, then equality and liberty are automatically ensured. How? Because if everybody is my brother or sister, then I can't be well-fed myself and keep the others starving, which means equality will be there. I can't be free myself and keep my brothers and sisters in chains. You'll also have liberty. And that is rooted in fraternity, a sense of oneness. And that's true fraternity or oneness was not possible so far at the present level of human consciousness. But then that is what will change. That will bring true fraternity, and that will ensure both equality and liberty. So that is one way of looking at how the French Revolution sort of paved the way for something which could happen in the future, but then it was very unrealistic at that stage, and that is why neither system of government which evolved, democracy and communism, neither of them could actually fulfill the expectations of this remarkable slogan, equality, liberty and fraternity. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the vision was highly futuristic, and it was going to the very root of all misery and suffering, which is a low level of consciousness, the low average level of consciousness. And it gave a hope and a certitude that this average will shift upwards, that will change the basic human nature, and that is what will eventually wipe out all the problems of human existence. And as a corollary, the type of political structure, social structure and economical structure that we'll have will also change, but that will be a corollary to this higher level of consciousness, because basically the typical human nature itself has changed.
So how well does the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo accommodate a communitarian life?
Community life, you mean life as in an ashram or a seminary, or are you thinking of the life as it for the average person who lives a life anywhere outside in the city?
A life, a common man's life.
Common man's life. Actually, that is where Sri Aurobindo's yoga is extremely relevant, because somehow over the last 1000 years or so, particularly in the Indian psyche, there had taken deep roots the idea that worldly life and spiritual life are poles apart. Spirituality is meant only for a select few who renounce the world, go away to the Himalayas or a cave or at least to an ashram, and for the rest it is ordinary worldly life, and they have no time for spirituality. So that was the type of idea that had taken root over the last 1000 years or so. But it was not always so in India. In India, spirituality permeated every aspect of life, be it the household work, parenting, or be it other areas like art, music, literature, dance, or even politics. Spirituality permeated everything. And spirituality is not incompatible with worldly progress, because when spirituality truly permeated everything in this country, our country was second to none in the world. In fact, till about 1000 years ago, India was second to none in any field of knowledge, including science and technology. So India was on the top. So spirituality is not incompatible. In fact, it is because we lost that touch. Spirituality was placed in one small compartment and was considered to be meant only for a select few. That is what led to the degeneration of the country, and slavery, of course, accelerated that degeneration. But then the idea was, can it be brought back to the modern world? can spirituality permeate every aspect of life in the modern world? That is what he said, it is still possible under any conditions. And the Pondicherry ashram became a sort of a laboratory to test whether it could actually happen. And it was a successful experiment, and that's why the Pondicherry ashram does not look like an ordinary ashram, in the sense that it is not like an old age home. It is there are no rituals, no ceremonies, there's no dress code, and yet the place has an intensely spiritual atmosphere, and that is something which you find in this ashram also in Delhi. In fact, this is the only branch of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry. There are many centers all over the world, but this is the only one that had been designated as the Delhi branch of Sri Aurobindo Ashram. So you find that the activities here are similar to what happens in the outside world, primarily education and healthcare, and yet the place has an intensely spiritual atmosphere. It's not because we are doing things which are different, but we are doing things in a different spirit and attitude. So spirituality can permeate every aspect of life, and that is what enhances, ennobles and enriches worldly life. And again, this has been rationalized. If the world is a manifestation of the divine, which means the divine itself assuming the form of its creation, permeating every aspect of the creation, then you cannot reject this world as a piece of falsehood. It is a reality. It may be a partial reality, it may be a temporary reality, but at the same time it is a reality. You cannot reject one aspect of the same divine and accept another part. You cannot accept the unmanifest and reject the manifest. And therefore, the manifestation in material form, in the form of animals, plants and human beings, and the worldly life that has been given to us, all that has to be accepted as a manifestation of the divine. It's indeed an imperfect manifestation, but as human beings, we have an additional responsibility because we can change it. So we don't have to reject the world and worldly life. Instead, we should seek to transform it so that it befits the one that it manifests. So transform worldly life rather than reject it. So it can be brought into every aspect of life, be it a householder's life, be it parenting, be it education, be it healthcare, every aspect of life, and including politics. It can be brought into everything, and that's how all these areas can benefit from that higher touch, from that God touch, and become worthy of manifesting the divine.
How can one better understand the concept of Aham Brahmasi and Tattvamasi in this present era?
Actually, these are concepts which are not confined to a particular era, they are universal in nature. These are rooted primarily in the experiences of the rishis, and it's not that the rishis existed only in the past and there are no more rishis being born. They'll continue to be born, and the type of experiences that they have had in the past and the type of experiences that they had relatively recently are very similar. In fact, there's a beautiful book by Aldous Huxley in which he has brought together the ultimate reality, the absolute reality or the highest reality as seen by the rishis of the Hindu tradition, the mystics of the Christian and the Judaic traditions, and the Sufis of the Islamic tradition, and he has put comparable descriptions by each of these together to show that the ultimate truth that has been experienced by each of them is the same. So these rishis and mystics, they have primarily used, again as Aldous Huxley says, two methods to arrive at that highest reality, to arrive at the experience of that highest reality. The two things that they have used primarily are intense concentration and extreme degrees of self-purification. And as a result, they have been able to answer some basic existential questions which many of us have had, but have not followed them up with the same seriousness with which these select few have done. And the experience that they had was that of the beginning of the universe before the material universe came into being with a non-material entity. So that non-material entity has always been there and will always be there. Call it an energy, call it a force, call it God, or call it a consciousness, whatever. Consciousness is a neutral word which perhaps explains it the best in the sense that consciousness has two aspects, knowing and being able to do something. And this is an entity which knew everything and could do everything. So it was the highest consciousness, the supreme consciousness, spelt in spiritual literature always with a capital C. Now, one of the things that decided that supreme consciousness, the divine, decided to do one day was to create a material universe. Now, that is where something a little distinguishes Vedanta from some other traditions comes in. The rishis of the Hindu tradition, the way they looked at it, this experience of that highest reality and that creating the material universe was like this, that highest reality, which was non-material in nature, created the material universe by becoming the material universe itself. Why that was proposed in Vedanta, that is the spiritual philosophy which grew out of the experiences of the rishis, was because the creator decided to create the creation, a material creation, but then it had no material available because itself was not in a material form. And therefore what it did was that it created the material out of itself. In other words, it became the creation rather than created the creation. Now, for example, suppose you have a carpenter and you want a table. You provide some wood to the carpenter. Without that, he can't make the table. So the carpenter is the creator, wood is the material, and table is the creation. Here the creator was there, it knew everything, it could do everything, but it had no material at its disposal for creating the material universe. But then because it could do everything, one thing it could do was to become material. So it became matter. And from that, it created the material universe.
The true meaning of Aham Brahmasi and Tat.
I'm coming to that. So he created that. So he created that material. Now, from this, and then, of course, in that process, it underwent a gross involution, which means that the all-knowing, all-powerful became something which seemed to know nothing and could do nothing. But then that supreme consciousness was infinite in character and the material it created was finite, which means that it did not really exhaust the creator, because anything finite taken out of the infinity still leaves the remainder is infinity. So the non-material supreme consciousness continued to exist beyond all creation. That is what we call the transcendent. So the transcendent continued to be there even after creating the material universe. But then since in the material universe it underwent a gross involution, it could apparently do nothing and could seem to know nothing, it started the opposite process of evolution. Well, not getting into that, as a corollary that the creator became the creation, what follows is that the creator is there in every bit of the creation. It's all pervasive in nature. That is what in your tradition you call the spirit of the creator. So the spirit of the creator is all pervasive, and that follows as a logical sort of a corollary from the fact that the creator became the creation. For example, suppose a child starts with a piece of paper, a square piece of paper, folds it and makes a boat out of it. Now if we ask the child, does the boat have the paper? The child says yes, of course, because the paper itself has become the boat. The boat is nothing but the paper in another form. So every bit of the boat has the paper. So in the same way, every bit of the creation has the creator. And it started evolving, it started expressing more of the divinity, which means that since we are a part of that creation, we also have that divinity within us, hidden within us. the spirit of the creator, and that is what at the individual level we call the soul. In other words, all creation is another form of the creator. So when we talk in terms of, say, human beings, when we say aham brahmasmi, that is, I am the divine or I am Brahma, what it means is that I am another form of the same. I am another form of the same creator, or the one creator. I am a form of that. Aham brahmasmi. Tattvamasi, but then not just me, you also are the same. You are also a manifestation of the same, and therefore you are also that. So aham brahmasmi, I am the divine. I am a highly imperfect manifestation. I do not manifest it fully. I want to manifest it fully. That urge and aspiration is there, but it's a long way to go. But all the same, the root, the fundamental essence, the ultimate reality of me, my soul, is the same as the divine. It's another form of the divine which has manifested itself imperfectly. And I'm put in my proper place, cut down to size, when I say that Tattvamasi, you are also that. That with a capital T. Means you are also that, the divine. So, we are all one. That's what it indicates. And I'm no better than you. We are all imperfect manifestations. We may be differently imperfect, but we are all imperfect. Each one of us has a long way to go to manifest that divinity fully. But we are on the way, and we can do it consciously or subconsciously. So we can consciously try to manifest a little more of that divinity. That's what Swami Vivekananda also said. We are all potentially divine, and the basic purpose of life is to manifest a little more of that divinity.
So my last question, what is the impact of great gurus in this world? In what ways we must acknowledge them?
The gurus don't really want anything, they have everything. And they don't expect from us anything for themselves. One way to look at a guru is that although our ultimate relationship and our ultimate goal may be to approach, reach and achieve some sort of an identity with the divine, a formless divine is something which is difficult to relate to. And what is much easier to relate to is the divine in a human form. And that is what the guru is for us. The guru becomes sort of the divine in human form, which of course all of us are, but then we see that in the guru. To see the divine in the guru is much easier than to see the divine in an ordinary human being for us. So we see the divine in the guru. And the way he plays an important role is that he ends up being that intermediary between the divine and us in a human form, and becomes a channel for channelizing the force of the divine to us. So the guru is a channel, a bridge, an intermediary. That is the role of the guru. And that's why the role of the guru is extremely important. And in one of those couplets it has been said that if the formless divine and the guru are both in front of me, whom should I kneel down to first? First to the guru, because he is the one who showed me the path to the divine. So the guru is extremely important. But then what does the guru expect from us, and how can we acknowledge them? The best way to acknowledge them is to be a good channel for channelizing their influence and not obstruct it. One of the obstructions is the egoistic feelings that we have, the type of rationalization and intellectualization and over-analysis that we sometimes go into in spiritual matters, and of course our negativities like greed and lust and so on. Now these are some of the negativities. Now all these become obstacles, which means that we reject the obstacles, make our aspiration more and more sincere, and realizing that we have our limitations, we surrender to the divine will. So we just try and be faithful instruments of the divine. Faithful instruments of the divine, and leave the rest to the divine in terms of our progress. The mother has a beautiful prayer. Let me do in the best way I can the best thing to do. A very simple sentence, but a very profound sentence. Let me do in the best way I can, not in the best way possible. That may not be possible for me. But at least let me do it in the best way I can. And what should I do in the best way I can? The best thing to do. And how do I know what is the best thing to do? By going within, by asking my soul what is the best thing to do. And that is again where the Guru comes in, because sometimes we can't be sure whether it is the voice of my soul telling me what is the best thing to do, or whether it is my own egoistic considerations which are telling me so. So one can turn to the Guru and ask the Guru, what is it that would be the best thing to do? So the important thing is to know what is the best thing to do. For that, go to an ethical code, or better still, turn to the Guru or to this inner voice of the soul from within. So these are the ways in which we know what is the best thing to do in a particular situation. So let me do in the best way I can the best thing to do. And again, in terms of actual expectations of the Guru, again the mother has a few simple things. She says, firstly, she says, be simple. Don't make your life complicated with too many thoughts. Spiritual matters can't be seen in intellectual terms. The intellect is inadequate for seeing them. We have a tendency. If someone has a tendency, yes, one can indulge in it, but up to a point. But don't expect that you will see all the truth and know everything using the intellect. So be simple. Then she says, be happy. Now how can that be given as an order? Somebody say, if I am suffering, how can I be happy? But then that is where the importance of spirituality lies. One can be happy under all circumstances. One can make one's happiness independent of external circumstances, because even in the so-called difficulties, problems, tough times, traumatic events, there is in fact the seed for spiritual progress. Each one of these difficulties is an opportunity for spiritual progress. Fortune and misfortune are a surface way of looking at things. In fact, both fortune and misfortune are only conditions and circumstances which are given to us for fulfilling the purpose of life, which is spiritual growth. So these are opportunities. So looking at that in a neutral, dispassionate way, one can be truly happy under all circumstances. So be simple, be happy. Then she says, do your work as well as you can. Work, what work? Try to do the best thing to do. In that we may not always be correct in judging what is the best thing to do, but at least we try to do the best thing to do, try to make a sincere effort to find what the best thing to do is, and then do it in the best way I can. So do your work as well as you can. And then she says, remain always open to me. Remain open to me means remaining open to the Guru, remaining open to the divine influence which the Guru can channelize to us. So we ourselves become that obstacle and do not remain sufficiently receptive to the divine force which the Guru can channelize to us, the divine grace which the Guru can channelize to us. Grace is again very important, because through our own efforts we will never go very far. It is that grace which is far disproportionate, far greater than our efforts, that helps us. Of course, we have to put in some effort to earn that divine grace, but at the same time, without that grace, we will not go very far. But then that grace has to be channelized by the Guru, and therefore we have to remain open. And remaining open means not letting all types of obstacles, mental obstacles, negativities obstruct that. So remain open to me. And then she says, that is all what is expected of you. So I'm very happy at this initiative, which is trying to bring two similar, related traditions, which and I did read something after you asked me. That's how it's Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary, which is attracting many other sister organizations also towards Sri Aurobindo. And in the same way, when you wrote to me what all Reverend Paulos Mar Gregorios had written and said, I read more about him, and then I discovered that he was a holy man, a learned man, a great scholar, writer, and an institution builder, apart from being a theologist. So this healthy interchange, crossbreeding that is making the way for that better human race which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have visualized, and I see it as one of the steps. Of course, every step in itself is small, but at the same time it is drops that fill up a bucket, as they say. So I see this as one of those drops which will fill up a bucket, and the bucket is change in the basic human nature, manifesting more of our higher nature than the lower nature, which in turn will change the way the affairs of the world are conducted and make the world a much better place to live in. So I see it as one of those initiatives which is making a small but significant contribution. Every contribution in itself will be small because the work is huge. At the same time, we are also a large numbers. The earth has a large population. So within that, each individual effort may appear small, but then that is necessary. And I see this initiative also as one of those contributions to this larger vision and certitude which Sri Aurobindo and the mother gave us of a better world in not too far distant a future.